So as I said in the introductory comments, we're very proud to announce that we have released a new policy form for our clients. With me today to help explain some of these features are Kevin Collins and Brandon Perry. Kevin Collins is a Senior Vice President, Design and Construction Leader in our company. He is responsible for business development, advancing professional liability underwriting, and the continuing development of market-leading products inclusive of all design and construction professional liability solutions at Victor US. Kevin has been with Victor for over 27 years in many capacities, including claims specialist and senior underwriter, working with design firms of all sizes and classes. He has more than 20 years of experience working with design firms and other construction-related professional service firms on issues of professional liability exposure and business risks. He has spoken extensively on the challenges to the design profession and a wide array of practice management issues. He graduated with a BA in government from the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, and is also a member of the Society of Registered Professional Liability Underwriters. Brandon Perry has over 10 years of experience assessing professional liability risk in the design industry. Currently, he is the underwriting manager for Victor Insurance Architects and Engineers Large Firms program. Prior to this role, he acted in a product development and management capacity, which included responsibility for the development of policy language and endorsement creation, coordination with insurance carrier partners, and assistance with response to regulatory inquiries. He began his career as an underwriter in professional liability, focusing on specialty construction consultants and environmental professionals. He's a chartered property casualty underwriter and holds an associate in risk management designation. He was recognized with the Business Insurance Magazine's Breakout Award in 2017. And he also is a graduate of the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. Thank you both for making yourselves available. And I just wanted to go over what exactly we'll be covering today briefly, and then I'll have a discussion to begin with Kevin Collins. We're going to talk about the professional liability policy that has just come out and what some of the coverage enhancements look like. And then we're going to focus in on one particular feature that I think is of particular interest to firms such as yours. It related to workforce use and gig economy workers. And we'll also talk about how the policy changes are designed to address those developments in the economy that we think will be very important for firms such as yours. After going through that piece and looking at some of those scenarios, we'll then look at some risk management considerations for firms that are looking to enhance their capabilities and their use of alternative type of arrangements with independent contractors. So, Kevin, thank you for joining us today. Give us a little bit of background about why we're developing new policy language and coverages at this point in time.
Thanks, Nahom. And that's a great question. I mean, with a program that's now entering its 62nd year, we've gone through this a few times, and it's something that we continually look at. So we started this process over a year ago, and it really does take a village as you start to look at where you are in your current policy form and things that we may be able to expand, enhance, or clarify for our insureds in order to better help them with their practices, going forward. To that end, what we started with the conversation, and as I said, it does take a village. So from one aspect, conversations bubble up with clients and the individual underwriter on accounts as items come up and you start to get a recurring theme. We're also blessed to have a lot of opportunity with engagement with our association partners. And I would highlight especially the AIA through the AIA Trust and National Society of Professional Engineers, where we're able to engage with practitioners as well to kind of test our theories, talk through it from a practice environment, and making sure that we're responding to issues that architects and engineers are facing in the industry. And then from an internal standpoint, as you work through that, obviously we're working with our carrier partners, CNA engaging in conversation on the claims team with issues that they're seeing and being faced by clients. So allowing us to get feedback from a lot of different angles as we try to wrap around that item. And as you can see from this list, although we're going to have time to talk about the first one, from the standpoint of really a deep dive from a risk management and an application perspective, we did want you to have the benefit of the coverage enhancements that are coming through with the 2020 policy form. Just for clarification, at this point, pretty much every state has, we've filed in pretty much every state with the new form, but many insurance departments at the individual state level require an approval and review process of the form before it's in usage. So not every state's been approved yet. But Nahom, at a high level, what you really see are three themes with these changes. One is the need to support practice of our design professionals, how we may be able to respond effectively with where design is going, how firms are registering and how they need to conduct business. Also thinking about some additional bandwidth of options that firms may utilize to mitigate their risk or to manage their risk over a long period of time. And then finally, what I'll call is clarification, areas of coverage that we can expand a little bit or provide some additional clarification on where it is. So Nahom, if it's all right at a high level, I'll run through them really quickly, and I'll skip over the insured piece because obviously we're going to spend a lot of time over the next 50 minutes talking through that issue.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. So from a supporting practice standpoint and bandwidth, what you can see here is, for instance, the defense outside the limits. This is a separate limit of liability that we can offer by endorsement that will be available once the state approves the 2020 form for smaller firms, roughly firms under $1 million in revenue. And this would be an additional premium-bearing endorsement that would provide firms with a separate limit of liability responding just to claims expenses, including attorney costs that may come from claims, including frivolous claims made by the owner or things that are not likely to result in actual negligence against the insured. In that way, firms that have a practice policy, as all policies provide, this separate limit may help to protect the contractual need to maintain a certain limit of liability coverage for their projects. So again, not something that everybody needs or wants, but it does increase bandwidth and provide firms with the opportunity to consider that as part of their overall insurance platform. We've also expanded our rectification coverage. Our current rectification coverage has a limitation on firms that are involved with both design and construction, whether they're performing it in-house, joint venture with a contractor, or hiring the construction team to provide the services. We added this coverage in the last policy iteration in the belief that some of these coverages available on the contractor side would jump into insurance requirements for design professionals in owner-based contracts. But what we also recognize is there is a long-term benefit and has been continuously in the program with getting involved with claims or situations early to help mitigate the cost and resolution to you and to your client. So we've modified this coverage to expand that will apply to firms that provide design services only on their project. So we've modified that requirement that needs to be design and construction. From a practical standpoint, there may be a lot of different ways to resolve the issue in contract, as simple as, the Friday meeting with the owner and the contractor in a design bid build situation that you need to inform them of it. The policy also provides free pre-claims assistance and other avenues to provide that mitigation and early warning system and getting CNA claims involved. But this, again, is just another way of access to the policy to deal with a situation that you've become aware of. And then on both the contractual and the clarification standpoint, we've updated our faulty workmanship exclusion. This exclusion has a large carve out for design professionals that when they have vicarious liability to a contractor, for instance, for flooring installation or other things that they may be doing, the policy has a carve out and does provide coverage for the vicarious liability. We've expanded the definition just to recognize that design professionals, especially engineers, may be taking on greater risk with subconsulting to geotechnical exposures, laboratory testing, along with firms taking that on in-house or having a specialization in that area. We're just clarifying that the drilling operations and those other aspects are all part of the carve-out. And then on the transportation exclusion, when the FAA several years ago defined unmanned aircraft or a drone as an unmanned aircraft, it kind of shot a hole in our exclusion a little bit. And although we were not excluding claims for drone usage, it did require us to go back and look at it and provide some clarification on that. So now the carve back just highlights that if you're performing professional services, whether you need a boat, to get underneath a bridge or a car or a drone or other aspects, that the use of those vehicles or transportation mechanisms would not be the basis of an exclusion. It's really part of the carve back if you're performing professional services. And then just on the last piece, the last several just help a little bit with contract review and negotiation, in that we expand our waiver of subrogation coverage, blanket waiver, to deal with subconsultants that the owner for the project may require a blanket waiver, and an architect or engineer who's a prime design professional is their client and has that under the base coverage. We've just expanded that so that it extends upline. So if the architect is required of the owner to have blanket waiver and they're hiring a mechanical engineer or a civil engineer as a subconsultant, that mechanical or civil firm that's our client would also be able to provide waiver of subrogation and contract prior to claim being made. And then the very last thing, which is not a change to the policy, but important, because as I mentioned at the beginning, each state is reviewing the new insuring agreement and coverages and will be approving it over time. And your policy is in force over a 12-month period. So the liberalization clause in the policy will come into play that, for claims made on or after the approval date of your state of these coverages, then CNA can handle that claim on the basis of the coverage that's now available in the state. That's what liberalization provides for. That way you don't need to guess or time the effective date of your policy with the state's approval date to get that coverage in place.
Okay, so just to clarify, so if you are now under the 2015 policy, and when you renew, and then sometime down the road, let's say 3 months from now, in your particular state, the 2020 policy has been approved, and then later a claim comes in, you get the benefit of the 2020 policy. Is that right?
Correct. So from a very specific situation, for instance, the state of New Jersey has approved the new insuring agreement as of July 1. So if you have a current policy with an effective date of May 1st, 2020 through May 1st, 2021, the fact that your initial date of coverage is prior to the approval date of New Jersey, the liberalization clause would apply for claims made on or after July 1, since New Jersey has now approved the new policy form.
Great. And if you are curious at all, if your particular state has been approved, one of the last slides has a web link showing where additional resources are available in regards to our new policy. And on that web page there is a list of the approved dates of the approved states to date. So it's as the approvals come in, that page will be updated. So if you're wanted to look that up, you can do that on that web page. Well, thanks, Kevin. So let's, like you said, I think most of the time, all of the rest of the time, we'll be talking about expansion of the term insured. But before we do that, we want to lay down some of the groundwork, what some of the thinking is as to why we did that, redefined the term insured in order to take into account some of the recent developments that we're seeing in the workforce. And with that, I mean, the big term today that we are talking about is the gig economy. So, for those of us who are a little slow on the uptake, Kevin, what do we mean by gig economy? I'm sure most people know about Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and so on, but how does this work in the context of professional services?
Sure. Thanks, Nahum. Well, I won't have to read the definition since you can see it on the screen. So this isn't something that's new. There has been a significant portion of the workforce that wants to have work-life balance or ability to move and some flexibility to do freelance work and other things. And out from that became the gig economy. So it's really defined by project to project, short-term contracts or freelance work, just like the definition shows. From a design professional standpoint, we really realign it around two different issues. One is an expansion of different ways to practice, but also the fundamental need for firms to be able to hire and find the right colleague for their project and firm. And so that I think what the gig economy provides is access to a group of individuals that does not desire to be a full-time employee or provide maybe a long-term commitment other than the project itself, but at the same time may be the best person for that project and the best team member to work within your firm. So I think every design firm right now is looking at this in some form or fashion, and very likely may have already been hiring gig economy workers or project-specific workers as they try to manage their staffing and profitability and need for work as the ebb and the flow. Unfortunately, I think the pandemic and our current environment working from home maybe has only accelerated that consideration, whether it's financial considerations within your firm or just a greater influx of available talent to be able to fund that. Nahum, just that there is a small underlying piece as well as owners consider transition of their firm or the need to continue practice, but also maybe looking to a life-work balance or carbon footprint or some other aspect. So there is an underlying piece here that I'll say is the firm that wants to run as more of a virtual practice where they don't have a physical office building, providing a little bit more mobility. I think early on in the process, those types of firms were looking at short-term contracts and project-by-project workers to fund projects as they come up. So again, regardless of the type of practice that you're looking to utilize, or if it's just as simple as trying to find the right person, the gig economy is another avenue of getting the right colleague into your practice.
And you did say that, COVID-19 may have accelerated some of this, but even before COVID-19, and I was doing research on this, economists were projecting that more than 50% of the U.S. workforce will be freelance workers by 2027, which, in reality isn't really not that far away. And so with that in mind, as you were defining what the policy would look like to help folks understand, I'm sure you looked at some of the pros and cons for firms, and if you can just elaborate on what some of the identified challenges and some of the identified advantages could be.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nahum. And it really reiterates around finding the right colleague or the right talent for that project. So right at the top of the list, one of the pros is it just expands the range and availability of talent to choose from, both in support of what Nahum talked about from the standpoint of the number of gig economy workers in the workplace right now. And then also the flexibility to expand and contract the workforce. So from your firm's practice, you may have situations where a client comes to you, an opportunity presents itself where you're going to have, multiple projects going at the same time, and you're going to need to build up capacity and ability to drive effectively on those projects. But over the longer term, you may not see that ability. So this allows you to expand and contract and manage the workforce that you need effective for that group as well. And then finally, again, as firms transition and owners or principal partners, the idea of retirement and other aspects change, this may give you access to people with a lot of experience within a firm, and again, not looking for full-time employment, but working to engage on a project-by-project basis.
Yeah, Kevin, and one thing that, that when we look at surveys, again, COVID-19 kind of has shifted the business environment rather quickly. So it's hard to get a hold of, updated business surveys and so on. But the 2018 survey of business executives, a third of the respondents said they plan on growing the use of gig workers in their organization. So this is definitely something that was being tracked, and we do see platforms like Fiverr Pro and others like that. I know of one called PE for Hire that are geared towards leveraging some of the technology enhancements. And Kevin, if you could speak to some of the issues that in your discussions, especially with the AIA Trust, some of the things that enable that, and what the firms that in our programs are looking to do or leverage. If you can just briefly speak to that, and then we'll transition over to Brandon.
Yeah. So obviously on this side, and you can kind of see it here from the standpoint of whether it's virtual workplaces or other aspects, is trying to create some efficiencies of access point to the firm to get materials, provide the services, and then loop back with the firm. Because on the last side, there was some cons there, and one thing that kind of overlays with this is the need for culture engagement, access to strong team environment, getting them acclimated, and some of the risks that you have with the expansion and contraction on this side. So, I think some of the enablers is the growth on the technology and access piece, whether it's, Zoom or Microsoft Teams or other things from the standpoint of meeting engagement, or some of the things that you see here, is how do we build stronger connectivity into that team environment. And as I mentioned, technology is starting to catch up. That's been easier to do.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kevin. We just wanted to lay out some groundwork before we delve into policy language about what we're seeing and what this policy is intending to respond to. So that's why we wanted to have that piece in there. So I'm going to now actually delve into the policy language as to what the differences are. And then we're going to look at a couple of scenarios to try to explain the concept beyond just dry policy language. So, Brandon, what is the exact change in the definition of the term insured in our policy when it's compared to earlier policy forms?
Thanks, Nahom. So to get to exactly how we're accomplishing this new coverage and what the full scope of it is, the underlying portions that you see on the slide there are really what's changed. So any person who is or becomes a leased or contracted personnel under the direct control and supervision of the named insured, but only to the extent of their scope of their duties with the named insured. So the key point there is any person. So I think while situations such as the current one with COVID-19 have shown how productive a company or an employee can be when they're working remotely, what this allows you to do is have a contracted person. So again, not another entity, not a subcontracted company, but a specific person who's under your direct control and supervision. That individual now has coverage under the policy if they're individually named. So it can't be a corporate entity again. So if you're subcontracting to whether it's a small or large company, this definition doesn't pick up that, because we're not intending to replace the professional liability that those subcontractors need to carry. What it's really for is individuals hired for a specific purpose on a specific project, who aren't intending to be long-term employees and aren't actually an employee at all, but are 1099s. the key point there being that they need to be under the direct control and supervision. You need to be essentially in a position where you're monitoring and supervising what's happening for that individual to have coverage under the policy. We see that this will open up a number of avenues for bringing on talented individuals with specific expertise. It also allows you to perhaps tap individuals in geographic locations that you otherwise wouldn't be able to readily access. Also bringing on people that have very specific key relationships to the project that you're working on, or perhaps even just a project you're pursuing. One of the things that we see is that this really helps aid the sort of bureaucracy of bringing on those talented individuals in terms of assessing, do they have coverage? Is it appropriate coverage? They'd like the coverage you have. And it really, we see, speeds up and allows firms to have a great degree of flexibility in their workforce overall.
Okay. So what if the contracted personnel that the firm reaches out to have a professional liability policy of their own? How does that work with the firm's, the CNA insured practice policy?
So our policy would only be primary coverage for that individual if they don't have a professional liability policy of their own. There could be several reasons why that individual doesn't have a professional liability policy. It might be that they, for instance, can't procure one because this is the only project they'll be taking on during the year, or that they work in a field that isn't generally considered to have professional liability, some academia areas like that. But to the extent they do have one, the CNA policy would still respond subject to its other insurance condition, which generally says if there's other available insurance, that insurance must pay first, and then the CNA policy would be excess.
Okay. All right. So let's dig into this just a little bit more with a couple of scenarios so that folks can get a flavor of what the intent is and how it actually works. An architecture firm, let's say, wants to engage an experienced specification writer, and the spec writer, for whatever reason, has yet to purchase a professional liability policy of their own. But the firm wants to get the spec writer started immediately. In years past, we would say, well, you would need to make sure that any of your subs have a PL policy of their own or make other arrangements. How does this change now change? How does the CNA PL policy affect what the firm's options are? How does this work?
So now, because of the change in this definition, the spec writer in this instance would have coverage under the policy, provided that they're being a 1099 under their own name. So it gives them an option to do this work without the requirement of their own professional liability. Now, it doesn't necessarily address whether or not that spec writer might want to pursue professional liability of their own, but it does ensure that they'll have that coverage available to them if it's something that's of interest to them. And it certainly, I think, provides an easier avenue for firms making sure that services are appropriately insured.
And, in this scenario, we said, okay, they want to purchase a professional liability policy, but what happens if they never buy that professional liability policy? What does that look like for the firm?
So if they never buy their own professional liability policy, then the entity that's hired them, that's contracted with them, it would be their policy that would respond if that spec writer is named in a suit. And the named insured of the policy would be the one responsible for paying the deductible, for instance. But that's where their coverage would lie. So it is important that if the spec writer is concerned about coverage, that they make sure that the hiring entity has maintained coverage through the time the claim is made.
Okay, and by named insured, just to unpack that for the audience, that means the architecture firm, whoever is named on the policy, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So let's look at one other scenario. And in this case, let's say the developer of an assisted living facility wants to put in safeguards related to COVID-19 spread prevention. This is obviously the topic of the day. And after providing preliminary options to the developer, the mechanical engineering firm wants to engage a university professor with expertise in biopolar ionization methods to deactivate viruses like COVID-19 to develop more detailed recommendations. So kind of a cutting edge approach to a current problem. And the university professor does have the expertise, but does not want to purchase a professional liability policy of her own for these occasional consulting engagements. So again, for that mechanical engineer firm, how does their policy respond, and how is that different from what they would have had to do under earlier policy forms?
Okay. Well, under earlier policy forms, the mechanical engineer would have generally had to contact their insurance broker, who would then speak with an underwriter, generally asking to have the professor named as a limited additional insured. Whether or not that professor was named would have been subject to underwriting guidelines and a number of other considerations. But with this change in the definition, that professor now has coverage under the policy, which is actually a fairly common scenario that we see asked about, hey, there's a professor who's got specialized knowledge about this particular issue. We don't intend to retain them for numerous projects, but we have the occasional project that comes up that we'd like to engage them on. And this allows coverage for that professor. So the way that it differs from really sort of what would have come before, the mechanical engineer would have always had coverage for their vicarious liability for the services performed by the professor, but the professor themselves would not have had coverage if they were named. So what this really allows is it allows the mechanical engineer to provide a degree of assurance to the professor that if something happens and is caused by this, our policy will cover you, and really allows them to tap those pools of talent that otherwise might be hesitant to come onto a project where they were exposed to liability. So we really see that this is one of the ways that firms are going to be able to respond quickly and effectively, and again reduces sort of the bureaucracy and back and forth that might happen. So this is one way for firms to quickly address needs and to scale up when necessary and tap specific pools of knowledge.
Yeah, we when we do contract reviews, this often comes up as a query, and we've seen this in the past. And our response, general guidance, has always been, insist that your sub has a PL policy of their own, or if you want to go through the steps of having them as an insured on your policy, please contact your broker. And go through those steps. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of reducing just the administrative burden of making sure that this person has some peace of mind and is able to continue should help firms engage. So thank you, Brandon. I think you've covered everything that I hope to accomplish with these slides, and I'm going to wrap this session up with some risk management considerations as we look at this. Obviously, we're talking about sea change and how you manage your workforce, making sure that it makes sense both in terms of managing your existing employees and as you expand and contract independent contractors. If this is a model that you are considering exploring, there are some things that need to be addressed proactively. From my way of thinking, obviously the big thing is that you may have been used to managing employees and setting expectations right, but with independent contractors, it's essential that they be treated and seen by the IRS and the state authorities and so on, that they are independent contractors and that you're maintaining that 1099 status. So that should be obviously top of mind, and we'll talk about some of the things that the IRS looks like. As licensed architects and engineers, there's a requirement that the licensed professional be in responsible charge. And if you're talking about now a more diffuse distribution with workforce gig employees contributing to the project, you still need to be cognizant of what being in responsible charge means. With software development and other industries, this is much more common, but there isn't that concern from a regulatory environment as to who contributed one piece of code or another. As long as it checks out and it works, then you can proceed. But as a licensed professional, you need to make sure that you are still in control of the process, and we'll talk about that. And then finally, obviously, network security and software licenses. These are things that, from a risk management standpoint, you want to make sure that that is in place to be able to safeguard both your intellectual property and your propriety information as far as your business partners and so on. Keep in mind that gig economy is in the news a lot, and there are state by state regulatory efforts to regulate this. There's a public policy concern that this is being used to take advantage of workers. Granted, that effort, the public policy effort, is geared towards addressing Lyft and Uber drivers, but from a firm standpoint, you certainly need to be aware of what the developments are. We know, for example, that California has a new law that seeks to rewrite the rules of work and what it means to be an employee. So beyond what I'm discussing today, just in a preliminary matter, you need to always be cognizant of what the public policy framework is developing into. And to that end, obviously, your trade associations and business groups will be able to provide more specific feedback in regards to that. So let's go through some of these issues that come up. Clearly, how do you distinguish between an employee and a 1099 contractor? The easy answer is that people receiving W-2s are employees, and those receiving 1099 miscellaneous forms are independent contractors. But for legal, insurance, and tax purposes, the difference is both significant and potentially can be costly to both the employer and worker, because there's taxes that need to be withheld, or the worker has to factor that in. And so you should know the basic differences to avoid legal or tax problems. And the IRS has currently what they call a 3-factor test to be able to distinguish whether somebody is considered an employee versus a 1099. And the first thing they look at is the behavioral control. The degree to which you exercise control over your workers' time, work life, and tools affects how they're classified by the IRS. If you train the worker, set specific hours, dictate how the work should be completed, they're more likely to classify them as an employee. If they set their own hours, decide how and when to get the job done, that could mean that they'll be looked at as an independent contractor. Now, this is a multi-factor test. It's not one issue is not going to be dispositive. but really, as the way the IRS sees it, as far as this particular factor is concerned, is that only the result of their work is it's really under your control. If you want to be able to dictate the way that the work is carried out, you might want to consider hiring an employee instead. It's just, and I think for a design firm, this is a particular challenge if you know you're looking to engage with fresh graduates who do need specific training and guidance as they develop their skill sets. To my way, the way I see this, it would be very difficult to get a fresh graduate in as an independent contractor, because you would need to be in more control of that. So as you look at workforce management, this may work well for certain segments, but from what I have seen, it's kind of a challenge to see how that would work, certainly with new graduates. So that should be kept in mind. The second issue that you need to be aware of is the second test is the financial control. If they're paid a salary or guaranteed a regular company wage, they're probably classified as an employee. But if they're paid a flat fee per job or project, more likely to be classified as an independent contractor. The IRS has what they call, says that the independent contractor has a significant investment in their business, whether it be equipment, training, and licensing, and they're not reimbursed for expenses like fuel, tools, and office supplies. So that is certainly something that they will look at to make sure that they're classified in the right category. Remember that, especially if you're looking to work with former employees, independent contractors by definition are allowed to carry out work for other businesses, and them being a business, they can incur a profit or loss just like any other small business. So you would be very, you should be very careful about making it appear like there's an exclusive relationship between you and the independent contractor that bars them from offering their services for somebody else. It's a totally different relationship that you have with them as opposed to an employee. So if that is a particular concern, then obviously the independent contractor route would not necessarily be a good fit. And then finally, the third factor in the three factors test is that, and this could be a challenge, assuming that it continues to be interpreted in this way, is that is the type of relationship you have with the worker. If the IRS currently says that if they are providing you with services directly related to your core work, then they're more likely that they will be seen as an employee. But clearly, in the context of a professional service firm, you are engaging gig workers who will be providing you things that are necessary for the performance of your business. That's the whole, that's the justification for going out and engaging independent contractors. So this to me, this factor on its own, assuming that the interpretation stays static, could be problematic. But generally, the IRS looks at the permanency of your relationship. They're brought in for the short term, carry out a set amount of work. And if you bring somebody on board for the long term and expect them to work for you indefinitely, then the IRS would probably consider them an employee. So what does this mean in a practical sense for you all? Well, obviously, this is something that would probably be part of your strategic direction for your firm. And as such, this is something that you would need to plan for appropriately. And you need to get the right counsel. And this really relates to labor laws and regulations. And a lot of these are also need to be looked at from your particular state. The thing you realize is that this has to be a formalized relationship between you and the independent contractor. So how you manage that is essential for you all to make this a success. What are your guidelines? How does the independent contractor interface with your current employees? And what are the contractual terms and requirements that set up that relationship? Technology, as we mentioned earlier, is a key part of this shift. And beyond the tools that you have now, how do you make sure that the contracted personnel are providing meaningful impact to the design process? What are some of the tools that you can use? And firms, by necessity, have really tested this out now due to COVID-19, and it's actually been quite a surprise to see how well firms have done in this environment. So this is something that firms would really have to leverage and make sure that there's the right tools in place to manage the independent contractors. It's essential that you create separation between you and your independent contractors. It's a business-to-business relationship. So that has to be formal and documented to ensure that you stay compliant. So you're dealing essentially with another business entity, and as such, if the time should come, you should be able to document clearly what the expectations are, what the terms were, and how there was separation between the firm and the independent contractor. What I briefly want to touch on here is this concept of responsible charge. Pretty much all states require that the design professional remain in responsible charge of the design services, and this is the license that allows you to provide your architecture, engineering, surveying, whatever landscape architecture services, whatever that may be in your state. And because you have that license, you have obligations, and one of those is that you actually control and supervise the design work. And it's really not sufficient just to review drawings or documents after preparation without involvement in the process itself. So as you look to carve out these tasks for these contractors, number one, you should be very aware of what your particular state requirements are to be in responsible charge, and make sure that you are the person who is in responsible charge is in control of the process, because that's how you can show that you are indeed maintaining control and are meeting your regulatory requirements. Solutions that are provided by your gig workers should be reviewed and evaluated before incorporating them in accordance with your state licensing statutes. So that's something that should be kept in mind. Other industries that are not regulated don't have this particular concern, but one should always be able to say to any regulatory authority that indeed you did meet the requirements of the law, and that needs to be incorporated in any business model that looks to use independent contractors extensively. And then finally, and again, I think COVID-19 has really shown us what firms are capable of, is cybersecurity. Studies have consistently shown that it's malicious insiders and human error that are among the biggest cybersecurity threats. And anybody that you are bringing in on board is really a cybersecurity threat. What that means to you as a firm is that your onboarding process should be comprehensive. It should address all aspects of what those particular risks are, especially in terms of cyber security. You need to have some level of comfort that your systems that are in place that will be accessed by your freelancers have the appropriate monitoring and alert systems, and that you indeed have the ability to segregate the information that is needed for design from other information that resides on your servers. I think this is essential to be able to consistently manage that risk. So, make sure that your folks have access to information only on a need-to-know basis. It doesn't make sense to open that up. As your freelancers will, likelihood be bringing their own devices. That's what a lot of independent contractors are expected to do. So the security protocols for that need to be developed and adhered to. Multi-factor authentication systems should be installed. By definition, your freelancers are all over the place, including someday in coffee shops and whatnot. So you need to make sure that those protocols are in place and that identity security is indeed implemented. And of course, your clients are increasingly concerned about this stuff. We see this in contracts increasingly, that there are client-imposed requirements as far as cybersecurity. That should be certainly flowed down to all freelancers. And then finally, design folks have some very sophisticated and expensive software. And you certainly want to make sure that your freelancers have the appropriate software licenses in place, that they've paid for them as part of their business, and that everything is on the up and up, because you don't want to be facing a software licensing issue with somebody who detects that an unauthorized software was used to develop the BIM drawings and so on. So that's where I see some of the challenges. I don't think any of these are, all of these are something that you can navigate through and manage appropriately. Competitive forces may well require you to look at these types of business arrangements increasingly, and we just want to be able to provide some background, some things to think about as you go through your business management needs. So in conclusion, provide a contract with clear terms and conditions. I think it's essential from a firm culture standpoint that you do provide feedback to the freelancers, especially in an environment where you're trying to develop design solutions and develop a relationship with them. And oftentimes you get feedback from freelancers who may have other experiences that could help you out, so that they can provide you with opinions and ideas. And if this can be a fruitful, project-based, but still, ongoing relationship that could be beneficial to both firms. And then, of course, the issue of firm culture is something that all firms are struggling with. Everybody's, working from home. That's something that will be, I think, a continual challenge to make sure that your traditional employees are still engaged, and you also have gig workers providing you with that supplement to fit your business needs. So we do have additional information available to you, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. The latest info on the list of approved states, as well as new policy information, is available here at this site. You're welcome to check it out. Kevin, I'm sure you're still on the line, about how many states have approved to date?
Close to 30 states.
Okay, so there's some 50-some jurisdictions that we file in, so there's a good chance that your particular state has already looked at this and approved it, and I encourage you all to look at that. We will do some additional webinars to discuss some of the additional features. Just wanted to point that out. That will be coming shortly, and keep an eye out for those announcements. And then finally, this presentation will be made available on the Victor School of Risk Management. If you're not aware of that, please, for all policyholders, this is a resource that's available to you. All of our library materials, all of our resources are on this website. And in addition to that, we have risk management webinars recorded for you that you can take advantage of that are available to you 24/7. This is in the School of Risk Management. If you click on that Continue Your Education tab there, you'll be able to register and take advantage of that online platform. I really haven't had a chance to address questions. We will be taking a look at the list of submitted questions. I see that there's quite a few, but we want to be respectful of your time, and we won't be able to get to that live, but we will address that in individual emails to you all. I really appreciate your attendance today. Please keep an eye out for the survey that will be coming to you shortly. Provide us with feedback. Let us know what you think of the program. That really helps us develop our programs, and we look to your feedback for that. Also, if you're looking for that continuing education certificate or reporting for the AIA, please provide the information in the survey. With that, Brandon and Kevin, thank you very much. And we'll wrap it up at this point.